The novella Animal Farm demonstrates the ways in which, despite of all the socialist propaganda, the leaders of the Russian Revolution had created a system much worse than the previous one. One of George Orwell's goals in writing Animal Farm was to portray the Russian Revolution of 1917. It was a revolution that resulted in a government that was more deadly, tyrannical, and totalitarian than the one it overthrew. Many characters and events of Animal Farm parallel those of the Russian Revolution. Mr. Jones represents Tsar Nicholas II, the last Russian emperor. Old Major is the animal version of Lenin, the leader of the Bolshevik Party. Snowball represents Leon Trotsky. Frederick is modeled on Adolf Hitler, and Napoleon represents Stalin. Tsar Nicholas II was the last ruler of the Russian Empire. He was removed from his place of rule much like Jones was. Nicholas believed that he was the uncontestable ruler of Russia. Millions of Russians under his reign experienced terrible upheaval and poverty, just like the animals under Jones led life of want and hunger. When Russia entered World War I, it lost more men than any country in previous wars. This outraged the people, and thus they began a series of strikes and mutinies. In order to avoid an all out civil war, Nicholas abdicated the throne. But the civil war arrived in the form of the Bolshevik Revolution. Tsar Nicholas II was then removed as a ruler and he died shortly after. Lenin was the leader of the Bolshevik Party that led the 1917 revolution. He was inspired by Karl Marx's theory of communism, which urges the workers of the world to unite against their economic oppressors. Similarly, Old Major also outlines the principles of animalism, according to which all animals are equal and must revolt against the humans who were their oppressors. Communism argues that a communal way of life will allow all people to live lives of economic equality. Similarly, animalism also talks of a world where all animals share equally in the prosperity of the farm. Lenin died before he witnessed the ways in which his disciples carried on the work of the reform, and Old Major dies before he can see the final results of the revolution. Old Major is seen to be uncompromising in his hatred of man, just as Lenin was absolute in his views. Lenin was responsible for changing Russia into the USSR, as Old Major is responsible for transforming the manor farm into the animal farm. Leon Trotsky was one of Lenin's allies, a Marxist thinker who participated in a number of revolutionary demonstrations and uprisings. Snowball felt that a worldwide series of rebellions was required to achieve the ultimate aims of the revolution. Trotsky's intellectual character and ideas about the best way to transform Marxist theories into practice is reflected in Snowball's plans for the windmill. Trotsky was the leader of Lenin's Red Army, just like Snowball leads the army of animals that repel Jones. Trotsky was eventually exiled from the USSR and killed by the agents of Joseph Stalin, just like Snowball is chased off of the farm by Napoleon. Stalin was one of the world's most feared and brutal dictators. He was unconcerned with debates and ideas. Instead, he valued power for his own sake. And by 1927, Stalin had assumed complete control of the Communist Party through acts of terror and brutality. Napoleon is seen to have similar beliefs. Stalin's KGB, his secret police that he used to eliminate all opposition, is represented by Napoleon's dogs. Stalin used a great deal of propaganda to present himself as an idealist worker for change. Similarly, Napoleon gains control under the guise of improving the animals' lives. His plan to build the windmill reflects Stalin's 5 year plan for revitalizing the nation's industry and agriculture. Stalin's order to place Lenin's body in the shrine parallels Napoleon's unearthing of Old Major's skull. Napoleon's creation of the Order of the Green Banner parallels Stalin's creation of the Order of Lenin. Many events in the novel are based on ones that occurred during Stalin's rule. The Battle of Cowshed represents the civil war that occurred after the 1917 revolution. Frederick represents Adolf Hitler, who first forged an alliance with Stalin in 1939 and later found himself fighting Stalin's army in 1941. Similarly, in the novel, Frederick seems like an ally of Napoleon, but his forged banknotes reveal his true character. Stalin conducted various purges and show trials to rid himself of any possible threat of dissension. This is represented through the various confessions and executions of animals. The hen's attempt to rebel against Napoleon is a representation of the unsuccessful rebellion of the sailors at the Kronstadt military base against the communist rule in 1921. The Battle of Windmill reflects the USSR's involvement in World War II, specifically the Battle of Stalingrad in 1943, when Stalin's forces defeated Hitler's, just like Napoleon's forces defeated Frederick in the Battle of Windmill. The card game at the novel's end parallels the Tehran Conference, where Stalin, Winston Churchill, and Franklin D. Roosevelt met to discuss the ways to forge a lasting peace after the war. A peace that George Orwell mocks by having Napoleon and Pilkington flatter each other and then betray their duplicitous natures by cheating in the card game. We can therefore say that Orwell has framed the story of Animal Farm as a political allegory. Every character represents a figure from the Russian Revolution. Mr. Jones, the original human owner of the farm, represents the incompetent and ineffective Tsar Nicholas II. The pigs represent the key members of the Bolshevik leadership. Napoleon represents Joseph Stalin. Snowball represents Leon Trotsky. Squealer represents Molotov. And the other animals represent the working class of Russia, who were initially passionate about the revolution but were eventually manipulated into supporting a regime that was just as incompetent and, in fact, arguably more brutal than the previous one.